Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Hannah Tollefson. I'll be the moderator of our conversation tonight. And if I speak here, can you still hear me? Yeah? It's better closer? Okay, I'll lean a little closer. So my name is Hannah, and I'll be the moderator of our conversation. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Institute for Environment, Conservation and Sustainability at the University of Toronto, Scarborough, who's putting on this event tonight. And I'm really honored and just really excited to be here with you all alongside our amazing speakers for this roundtable on vulnerable communities and climate justice. This is the final event in the Institute's three-part series this year, Climate Communication After Climate Denial. Although the historical conditions that we're living in seem to suggest that denialism might never actually go away, but just kind of change form. So the roundtable tonight, the premise that it kind of begins with is that while the wealthiest classes of people are the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, marginalized and working class communities really bear the brunt of climate impacts. In light of this starting point, our panelists tonight will discuss both the unequal burden of climate collapse, as well as consider the ways that vulnerable communities are both disproportionately affected and play really important roles in the struggle for climate justice and a just transition. So tonight we'll explore why some of these voices have been left out of mainstream environmental movements, draw out some of the gaps and the solidarities between movements for land back, racial justice, and working class climate politics, as well as ways forward and things that we might want to think about, especially with the rise of the far right. I also want to begin tonight's conversation by acknowledging that we're gathered on the lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Here, I'm just going to. These nations stewarded these territories for thousands of years before being subject to violent colonial dispossession. And despite this ongoing colonial violence, this place remains home to these nations, as well as many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. It is also home to many other diverse peoples, many of whom were displaced or brought here under conditions of coercion and violence, and peoples whose lives and resistances also shape the possibilities of climate justice today. This ongoing history is a necessary starting point for our conversation today. Climate justice is inseparable from land justice, and Indigenous peoples have long led struggles against extraction, pollution, and environmental destruction of many kinds. So I offer this acknowledgement to open tonight's conversation in a good way, and with the hope that it can be a space to think together about collective action and about solidarity in the face of urgent, challenging, and in some instances, overwhelming political conditions that we find ourselves in. So tonight's event is organized by the Institute for Environment, Conservation and Sustainability, which is based out of the University of Toronto in Scarborough. And at IECS, we examine how societies shape and have been shaped by the environment, past, present, and future. Grounded in the arts, humanities, and social sciences, the Institute explores the cultural, social, and political transformations needed to confront the challenges of climate change and forge new possibilities for human and non-human flourishing. Through public programs, faculty and student research support, and independent research initiatives, the IECS fosters critical inquiry into the social and structural changes required for a truly transformative, sustainable future. And if you're interested in learning more about the IECS and to stay up to date on our future events, you can visit our newly launching website at utscenvironment.ca. Tonight's event is also a partnership with the National Observer, Harbinger Media, and Another Story Bookshop, who are selling books out front. And we want to thank them for their support in making this event possible and for getting the word out. And we also owe a shout out to the Green Majority radio show on CIUT for advertising the event. Another thank you goes out to Tatiana Rios, Mark Apollonio, and for their work in making this event possible, as well as the broader Climate Communication After Climate Denial series. And one last housekeeping note before we jump into tonight's conversation is just to note that tomorrow night there'll be another event which involves back-to-back talks with one of our speakers tonight, Matt Huber, alongside Miles Lennon on a kind of related theme of race, labor, and the political fractures of climate action. And that's at 3 p.m. at Seeley Hall, Trinity College. So, for our discussion tonight, the format will kind of work this way. Each panelist will introduce their work and their kind of perspective on the roundtable's themes with a short 8 or 10 minute presentation. After that, I'll ask each of the panelists a kind of opening question to get things started. And then we'll open the floor to audience questions as well, so you can prepare your questions while we're speaking. So without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce our amazing panelists tonight, who, again, I'm just really honored to be in conversation with. The first is Angele Alook, who is an assistant professor in the School of Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies at York University. She is a member of the Bigstone Cree Nation in Treaty 8 territory, where she's carried out research on issues of sociology of family and work, resource extraction, school-to-work transitions, Indigenous identity, and seeking the good life in work-life balance. Next, we have Matt Huber, who is a professor of geography in the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University. He is formerly the author of Lifeblood, Oil, Freedom, and the Forces of Capital, as well as his newest book, Climate Change is Class War, Building Socialism on a Warming Climate. Third, we have Geoff Dembicki, who is an investigative journalist and author, most recently, of the Petroleum Papers, Inside the Far-Right Conspiracy to Cover Up Climate Change, which was named a Best Book of the Year by the Washington Post, which covers historical disinformation efforts related to Alberta's oil sands. He's also the managing editor at DSMOG. So, and then finally, we have Zamani Ra, who is the founder of Seed Canada, an internationally recognized, award-winning, not-for-profit organization that provides environmental education, primarily, but not limited to, social housing communities. She brings a unique intersectional perspective to helping people conceptualize climate action with cultural relevance. Zamani's work bridges grassroots experience with high-level advocacy, fostering joyful, inclusive, and impactful change. She currently sits on the Climate Advisory Board for the City of Toronto and is a co-founder of the Black Environmentalist Alliance. So without further ado, I'll ask Angele to come up and speak to us. I'm sorry, I did a terrible job at moving us through these slides. There we go. I hope you have better luck than I with that.
Yeah, it's fine.
Thanks a lot.
So you'll have to forgive me tonight. I've spent the last 2 weeks mobilizing and organizing Indigenous faculties at my university to protect and uphold decolonization and indigenization of our education, and also protecting Indigenous knowledges and Indigenous languages at my institution. So I'm very exhausted, and I'm very disheartened by everything that's happening. So that's where I'm coming from today. So please forgive me if I don't know, seem disorganized or anything. So I'm going to talk about my body of work, the book, The End of This World, Climate Justice in So-Called Canada. I'm also going to talk about my research that I've been doing at the United Nations Framework Convention on United Nations Convention on the, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, the UNFCCC. So I've been active in these UN climate conferences since 2019. I've attended COP25, 26, 27, 28, 29, and I'm very active in the Indigenous caucus there. And through this work, I've started interviewing and documenting the work of Indigenous climate leaders from around the world. I'm also a labor expert that comes out of the labor movement, and so I like to make the connections between labor, work, care work, Indigenous knowledge systems, Indigenous legal systems, and the climate crisis. So my research asks, how can we address the climate crisis using Indigenous knowledge systems, restoring Indigenous sovereignty, and upholding the voices of Indigenous climate leaders? How can we transition our economy away from fossil fuels? How can we transition to the better future for all? And what are Indigenous solutions to the climate crisis? And part of this answer is that a just transition for Indigenous peoples should imagine a future built on Indigenous knowledge with transformational shifts in how we think about work and economics. A just transition should be for all. It should be led by Indigenous understandings of economies and livelihood and life. A lot of the writing on like a Green New Deal and just transition focuses on energy workers, which are mostly mostly jobs done by men. And so when we talk about a just transition, I think we need to consider also how a just transition will impact women, racialized minorities, those who do care work, those who work in the public sector. And so that's what I mean when I say a just transition for all. One of the things I like to talk about is how our current economy in Canada is based on extracting resources from Mother Earth. And what we have right now in Canada is a capitalist colonial economy. As a feminist, I like to call it a death economy. We're just extracting and extracting. Oil companies are making, very high profits, and this economy is not built on care. So, and this economy is built on the destruction of Indigenous sovereignty, Indigenous lands, and Indigenous ways of knowing. So I propose that we move towards an economy based on life, based on a good life, based on access to decent work. And so I propose a decolonial feminist future and a just transition that is based in Indigenous feminism and trade unionism. So a capitalist colonial economy has caused Indigenous societies to go from economic systems of sharing, caring, respect, and reciprocity with the land, where responsibility to the collective provided well-being from cradle to grave, to a colonial system that displaced Indigenous people from their lands and pushed them into economies of poverty and dependency with only enough to keep them alive. That's part of the Indian Act policy. That quote comes, there's books and all kinds of things written by Indigenous scholars about how under the Indian Act, we're just given enough to be kept alive. Working to restore Mi'upamatsuwin, which means to live a good life, will destroy a capitalist colonial economy that is based on a death drive of Indigenous peoples and restore ethical Indigenous economies that are adapted to our present realities. This time we need an economy that's built on life and that's based in Indigenous laws. And so in the book, The End of This World, I talk about Nihio laws, Cree laws, that we should build our new economy on, which are also systems of care and also systems where care work is the center of the economy. And the laws of Mi'upagamahawasuin, which mean raising your children up in a good way. Mi'uwichitawin, which means having good relations and unity. Situskatawin, pulling together for survival. And one of the most important laws, Manachitawin, respect and reciprocity with the land. all lead to what I refer to as Miopa Matsuin in my work, living a good life with balance between family and work. And together, these laws provide a strong basis for a climate-safe, care-centered, and equitable world we want to build going forward. So I go from that work of talking about just transition built on Indigenous economies of care to then this new work that I've been doing the past couple years on a project called Indigenous Climate Leadership and Self-Determined Futures. So this project applies Indigenous approaches to understanding and supporting Indigenous climate leaders and governance through an Indigenous feminist and decolonial lens. Tonight I'm going to be talking about the interviews that I did at COP27, but I've also subsequently done interviews at COP28, and I've also filmed interviews with climate leaders at the Bonn Intersessional at the UN. So in total, I've done about 45 interviews, and we're hoping to create a documentary out of our filmed interviews. And we've interviewed Indigenous folks from all over Turtle Island, but we've also interviewed Indigenous folks from all over the world in our most recent work where we filmed interviews. So this research is based in Indigenous feminisms and story work, and also in understanding that Indigenous women traditionally have roles in caring for the land and caring for the water. These are the types of questions we asked people at COP27 and also at COP28. What motivates Indigenous climate leaders to get and stay involved at COP? What challenges exist for Indigenous people within the COP space? What is climate leadership? And how is self-determination described at COP? And what recommendation do Indigenous community members make to value and support further Indigenous-led climate action? So one of the motivating factors for attending COP and international dialogues and being active at the United Nations is that Indigenous people are doing this out of necessity. So here's a quote from Janine Yazzie. She says, "So now that we're in this situation where we're at a tipping point, and according to many different reports, we're past the tipping point when it comes to climate change impacts, we're having to really think about and create greater safeguards for our rights as Indigenous people so that we can create the foundation necessary to do what we're doing to evolve our traditional practices and ways of livelihoods to adjust to the situation on the ground for place-based, culturally informed solutions. And to do that, we have to be involved in these conversations where states and their partners are determining both the value of traditional knowledge in climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies and the role that it has in these decisions that are being made. So Indigenous people have to participate because we're the most impacted by the climate crisis. And a lot of these climate policies, whether they're national or international, describe Indigenous knowledge systems as a way towards sustainability, towards nature-based solutions, but they don't actually mean what they say. So we need to be there to keep nation states accountable. One of the main challenges that we hear from Indigenous climate leaders at the United Nations and in the COP space is that every day we're fighting colonialism every day. So the UN is designed as a space for nation states to come together and talk about, negotiate the Paris Agreement, come up with climate policy. So Indigenous nations don't really have a seat at the table. And one thing Indigenous folks like to say at the UN is, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so these are very colonial spaces. Like COP was held in the UK, it was held in Spain, in nations where like our colonizers are from. And you really feel that. And it's oftentimes very tokenistic. And I have tons of stories of racism and sexism faced by Indigenous folks in these spaces, but we spend a lot of time in these spaces just trying to explain how Indigenous knowledge is actual, real knowledge, how we've been here since time immemorial, and how our knowledge systems and languages are valid, ways of thinking and ways of understanding the economy and science. Um, Indigenous climate leadership is described as frontline action. And this can be anything from food sovereignty activities back home. It could be climate action, protests, and things like that. Some of the main leaders in the climate justice movement are Indigenous women and Two-Spirit folks. And this is very apparent when you're in these spaces. And one of the things Indigenous peoples talked about is building solidarity among Indigenous folks. So these participating in the UN can be very disheartening because it is a colonial space, but there is a great deal of care and reciprocity and support that Indigenous folks feel in these spaces. It's also very mentally draining to be in these spaces because you're basically defending your existence as Indigenous people. And we're trying to uphold, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. We're trying to insert Indigenous rights in the Paris Agreement, and this could be very draining when you're dealing with nation states that don't recognize your sovereignty. This is another recommendation, but another thing that we talk about is how Indigenous climate leaders from Turtle Island perceive the green economy. And basically what's happening with the green economy is that it's another colonial system. We're not being adequately informed. Free prior informed consent isn't always there. We're not properly consulted. So even as we move towards renewable energies, if we're going to be, supporting these projects, Indigenous people need to be consulted. And Indigenous people need to be part of these decision-making tables where these things happen. So, that's everything that I wanted to share. Thank you very much for having me, and I'm sorry for jumping all over the place, but I've had a very busy 2 weeks. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me and for this really nice event. Feel like I am from the United States, so I think the elephant in the room is I should apologize for whatever my government has done today or last week or last hour. Honestly, this book I wrote that came out 3 years ago really came out of a moment and a movement in the first Trump era that we really felt like the only way we can really defeat Trumpism long term is building a robust working class politics that can do things like give people health care and address climate change. And that movement was pretty much crushed in 2020. And they said we have to accept a sort of practical, moderate, centrist. And, Trump's back. So I'm very angry is what I'm trying to tell you. So, but I want to today tell you about the perspective that came out of that book and I still think is relevant. So there is an emerging kind of consensus that climate change is a problem of class inequality. But how do we understand class inequality? Perhaps the most prominent analyst of inequality is Thomas Piketty, who asserts in his research that the top 1% of carbon emitters have comparable carbon emissions to the bottom 50% of the world. And his findings sort of echo several recent studies from Oxfam and many others. And what all these studies share is a common focus on the use of carbon footprint accounting, a concept itself that was invented by British Petroleum, that attributes emissions to the consumption and lifestyle practices of everyone, from a Wall Street executive with a private jet to a poor subsistence farmer in Kenya. And all individuals are seen as wholly responsible for the emissions embedded in their consumption practices. Now, this way of thinking about carbon inequality is quite entrenched in mainstream circles, but there are problems with it. The first problem is consumers are seen as 100% responsible for their emissions, but what about the actors that provision their consumption? When we consume gasoline, we do indeed create emissions, but oil corporations sold us and profit from that fuel. And we might be simply trying to get to work, but they operate an entire carbon-intensive business and hope to continue doing so deep into this century. So the second problem with this is, from this point of view of carbon footprint analysis, a Hollywood actor with a large house and an SUV is more responsible for climate change than a vegetarian fossil fuel executive who takes public transit. What if the same fossil fuel executive even, drives a Hummer and eats steak twice a week? This action pales in comparison to their main life activity, which is managing a global network of projects that are meant to turn fossil fuels into profit. And that activity we don't pay much attention to when we talk about carbon inequality. So when we focus on the consumption and lifestyles of the rich, we miss their role as owners and investors in even more destructive systems of production. In other words, we miss how they generate the money that makes the consumption possible in the first place. So one intervention I want to make here tonight is I don't think we should say that climate change is driven by the wealthy as a general category. Rather, I should say climate change is generated by capital, specifically a class that owns and profits from carbon-intensive forms of production. So instead of thinking about class in terms of consumption and lifestyles, I propose an old school socialist understanding of class that defines it in terms of your relationship to the means of production. This class analysis locates a tiny minority of society who owns and controls production for profit, the capitalist class, while the majority of society, I assume most of us in this room, own little more than the labor in which we must sell for a wage or a salary in order to survive. And from this perspective, it is clear enough that the working class, or the workers, have very little power to shape the organization of the energy systems and infrastructure systems and production systems that are at the heart of the climate crisis. So the seemingly outdated understanding of class couldn't be more relevant to the climate problem. The IPCC research shows that over a third of emissions come directly from industrial production, but really, if you add up food and agricultural land use and electricity, basically around 70% of emissions come from how we organize production. Agricultural production, electricity production, industrial production. So this class analysis, focusing on ownership, investment, and production, and who's actually profiting from the climate crisis, creates a simpler, though perhaps more difficult political equation. Rather than simply a moral project of transforming millions of dispersed lifestyles, solving climate change is really about confronting the power of a small group who control and profit from this production. And like countless historical examples of efforts to confront concentrated economic power, we're going to need a broad-based mass movement to kind of pull this off. So that comes to the next issue that the book covers, which is the climate politics is almost completely driven by what I call the professional class. These are a class of people with advanced degrees, use credentials to carve out advantages in the labor market. Think of scientists, journalists, academics, nonprofit staffers, government workers, college students. These are the people that really dominate the climate advocacy space. A problem with this class is it's relatively a minority of the workforce. This is just one estimate for the United States, but 22% of the workforce. Broadly speaking, in the United States, only 37% of people even have a college degree, so this is not the basis of a mass majoritarian climate politics. Another problem with this class is they tend to think the climate struggle is largely a fight over knowledge, about accepting the science or belief in denial in the science. And this kind of politics of knowledge and science is also not really a basis to resonate with the larger masses of working people. The Yellow Vest movement in France kind of put it this way, that politicians are concerned with the end of the world, but we are concerned with the end of the month, and I think it's the consistent failure of the climate movement to really resonate with these end-of-month issues that has been part of the failure of the movement to achieve the power we need. Furthermore, since the professional class project is inherently about attaining middle-class economic security, they can enjoy some degree of material comfort, including things like home and car ownership and professional expectations of flight travel. And this creates an overwhelming anxiety of carbon guilt while the world burns. So rather than focus on those with the real power to control and profit from the energy system, professionals tend to blame themselves. That means professional class climate politics often centers on what I call a politics of less, of lowering footprints, consumption, and degrowth. And it's easy to see why this politics has little chance of resonating with the broader working class, even in a rich country like the United States, where you have over 60% of people living paycheck to paycheck. There's literally a housing crisis. Most people are afraid about even affording health care. And it doesn't help that many of the things that are sold as ways to lower our contribution to climate change, like solar panels and electric cars, are very expensive. And the problem is not just climate. This is a political problem that we're facing here in Canada and in the United States, which is that basically the parties that used to be parties of the working class are seeing their bases shift towards more educated, affluent voters, and more working class voters are shifting to the right in droves. Now, my argument is not that professional class people or politics are inherently bad. All powerful working class and other social movements in history have always had these critical layers of professionals and intellectuals. My argument is that a specific kind of professional class climate advocacy tends to alienate and antagonize the vast majority of working people in a society. And we definitely need educated professionals in movements and building organizations that seek to get out of kind of small insular bubbles of educated activists and orient themselves outward towards convincing the masses who don't already agree with them about whatever politics they're trying to win. So the book, and I'm going to try to end now, says that to solve climate, we need a much broader, popular, majoritarian climate politics that appeals to the vast majority of people in the working class. And it is convenient that the sectors that we need to transform for climate change, energy, transport, housing, food, these are core working class needs that working class people have really insecure access to. And I think, again, in my country, the 2024 election shows in crystal clear terms that the cost of living is kind of like the issue that trumped all other, I shouldn't say trumped, that overrode all other issues, right? So this kind of broad-based climate program would seek to appeal to the whole working class on these very material, end-of-month types of struggles. And so this strategy on climate change that I propose is not really even about the workers. Well, it is about the workers, but it's not just about industrial workers in the relevant sectors that we need to decarbonize, but also the broader working class that includes low-wage workers and all sorts of service jobs, low-wage retail, care work, and all sorts of, the broader service sector that would benefit from a decarbonization program that attempted to offer more secure access to these things. Finally, we not only need this set of broad working class strategy, but a more targeted strategy that centers the labor and union movement that's really a source of power that can catalyze social change. And history shows that labor, specifically the power to strike, has been at the core of massive and powerful movements for social change in history. But the problem is that it's almost as if the labor movement and workers have forgotten the power that they have, and the sort of strike activity has fallen off a cliff since the 1980s. More to the point, solving climate change is really going to take, as the first presentation put it, it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of like building of this new world that we need to create. So we're going to have to win over the workers who are going to build this new world, build this new energy transition, particularly the industrial workers. And the problem is, it's these types of workers, the workers that tend to work with their hands and not with their heads, like most of us in the professional class. It's these workers who are shifting rightward, right? And the very workers that we need to kind of build this new energy transition. So I think any powerful climate movement would make it the number one priority to get these kinds of workers on board in the critical sectors we need to transform, like electricity and the wider building trades. So, in conclusion, since my book came out, it's become clearer than ever that fossil fuel interests will continue to profit off this energy source unless there's a force in society that can get them to stop. And I'm trying to revive this sort of old school Marxist socialist idea that really thinks that the working class in society, the workers that do the work in society, have this power. They have the power to shut down production and force a crisis in society and force elites to actually have to answer to a set of demands. And so I think we really need a kind of strategic focus on the working class as the agent that can not only liberate the workers, but save the burning planet. So thank you.
Hello. Just going to raise this. So I know that the title of this event is Beyond Climate Denial. However, 2 weeks ago, I was very much immersed in some of the most hardcore kinds of climate denial. And that was because I was at an event in London that's called the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. And so this was basically a gathering of the global far right, various Trump administration officials, some of the most prominent climate denial groups in the world. And it was organized by the U of T's very own Jordan Peterson. So hometown hero, right? And so at this event, I'm sort of shocked that they let me into it, because I've written very consistently about Jordan Peterson's growing sponsorship of climate denial, to the point actually where he started following me on Twitter and retweeting everything that I wrote about him with some sort of mean remark. But they did let me into the conference, and on the first evening, I found myself in kind of a special, like, off-limits drink reception. Me and actually a couple journalists from the National Observer managed to make our way in, and one of the journalists got kicked out when security realized who he was. So me and the other journalists, we flipped our badges around and sort of like held our drinks close to our chests and tried to blend in. So the keynote speaker at this drinks event, his name is Kevin Roberts, and if you aren't familiar with him, he's the head of a group called the Heritage Foundation, which was basically the lead organization behind Project 2025, which is kind of the radical conservative plan to totally reshape the US government that's now being implemented by the Trump administration. And so Kevin Roberts got up and he made what I thought was a really kind of weird argument. He was talking about the recent wildfires in Los Angeles, and he said, these were absolutely had nothing to do with climate change. He said, climate change is a fiction. And he said, the real reason that these wildfires happened is because Democrats are too focused on people's pronouns. And the entire room, they just lit up with applause. I mean, I know people were getting kind of drunk, but it's just it's a bizarre argument, on the face of it. But as I went around the conference over the next couple of days, I just heard versions of this over and over again. Nigel Farage, he was responsible to a large degree for Brexit in the UK, and now he's head of a climate denial organization in the UK called the Heartland Institute. And he also leads Reform UK, which is a very conservative political party. Nigel Farage, he did a speech and he said, climate action is the same thing as DEI or pronouns or wokeism. It's all the same thing. There was the Trump administration energy secretary, Chris Wright. He said the same thing. Net zero it's a sinister woke plot to control the world on behalf of gender ideology and various other progressive symbols. And I mean, obviously, it's easy to sort of like point out how ridiculous all of that is, and how kind of incoherent an argument it is. But I do think that there is some sort of like strong like conservative logic holding all of this together, and I think it sort of speaks to part of the far right's like broader strategy for how to win political power. And so I think it's obvious to a lot of people, especially a lot of the people at this conference, that climate change is getting worse. The disasters are very difficult to ignore. And at the same time, it's obvious that you can make a lot of money in the green economy. And that's definitely obvious to all of these like super free market, hedge fund, like global financial capital people. They all know it. And so they can't really win an argument against climate action just based on attacking the science or on attacking the economics. I mean, they definitely tried, but that doesn't sort of like hold up entirely as an argument against climate action. And so I think in this new phase, what they're doing is they're taking a belief that radical transformative action is necessary, and then tying it to this whole list of progressive things that conservatives have spent years creating fear and anger and outrage around. So now let's say you're one of these conservatives in the room and you're like, well, I think climate change might actually be real, and my buddy like owns a solar company and it's made him $1 billion, and now he's like, he gets to buy a second yacht. I mean, it seems kind of okay to me. So now if you're at that conference and you're listening to like Nigel Farage or this Kevin Roberts guy or whatever, what they're telling you is, if you subscribe even a tiny bit to the climate agenda, you're supporting wokeism, you're supporting abortions, you're supporting all these things that we told you shouldn't like. And so the social costs are really kind of ratcheted up. And I think for the vast majority of people, a need to belong to a social group is a way stronger motivator of action than advancing the correct scientific or economic argument. But I think another key part of this strategy is a lot of these far right people and politicians we might call populists. They're aiming their message at a very specific sort of swing voter. And these aren't the swing voters that we've kind of been told about or we endlessly discuss in the media. There's this idea, and I think it's kind of a myth, that the average swing voter is fiscally conservative and a bit socially progressive. And you saw that in Kamala Harris's campaign when she was talking about abortion rights and access, and then campaigning with someone like Liz Cheney. She's aiming like straight for that type of voter, but I think that type of voter is actually sort of made up. And I've seen a lot of really compelling polling and other analysis that shows that the true swing voters in the US, and to a large degree in Canada too, are actually probably a bit economically populist. They distrust corporate concentration and power, and they're quite socially conservative, or at least conservative towards what they see as progressive symbols. So DEI, wokeism, pronouns, sort of the whole gamut. And you can see why to a populist like a Nigel Farage or a Trump or Pierre Poilievre, it's kind of an effective message to attack the woke agenda of these green executives and investors who are trying to make you drive an electric vehicle and basically like exist in this sort of like caricatured progressive way in the world. And I think why that strategy is potentially effective is because a lot of these conservative peoples are like hardcore career elites. I mean, Pierre Poilievre, he's been in politics since he was like 20 years old. But by attacking like woke CEOs or net zero globalists, conservatives can kind of signal, well, we might be elites, but we're not these kinds of elites. And these kind of elites are worse, and you should hate them. And it's also effective because these conservative movements can act like they're pushing for profound transformative change when really nothing much is getting changed at all. So when someone like Trump gets into power, or Pierre Poilievre, if he's able to win the Canadian election, he can point to a bunch of banks and other companies that maybe because of the victory have dropped their DEI initiatives or no longer do ESG investing or maybe scaled back some of their clean energy. And a conservative can say, hey, look, we won. We said we were going to take on the corporations, and now they're removing all of this stuff. So we did it. We represented you guys. And meanwhile, it's a good deal for the companies because they get to drop a few cosmetic things, maybe roll back a few of their programs that they were mostly just doing for PR, and then they can just keep drilling all the oil that they want like nothing ever happened. And so in conclusion, I say all this not to depress everyone, even though it is absolutely depressing. But I think to the extent that we know like what's actually going on and sort of the strategy and rationale of a lot of the most entrenched sort of fossil fuel conservative politics, I think it allows us to be much more effective in trying to counter that. So I'll wrap up there. Thanks.
Okay, greetings everyone. Nope, you're too quiet. So I'm gonna try again. My mom's in the audience, so I have to make sure you have to make sure I look good, So greetings everyone. Yes, that's good. I'm here on behalf, of course, the creator. I would not be here without her. I'm also here on behalf of my ancestors and all of yours as well. I'm here on behalf of my grandparents who are farmers, agriculturalists. I'm here on behalf of my mom who is in the audience, my sister, yeah? You can clap her up, yeah? My sister who's also in the audience. I'm here on behalf of my aunties and uncles. There's 26 of them. So there's a lot of farming and things that take place in our community, right? Of course, I call them land people. And the reason why I call them land people is because they are people who live literally off the land, But I guess we'll get into that. I am an African, but I was born in Jamaica, and now I live in Canada. So when we first came here, we came to Toronto, and then we ended up going to Calgary. I'll get to that part. I want to thank U of T, and I want to thank the organizers of this event for reaching out to me. I was very surprised to get the call out. So I want to thank them for that. I want to thank the Institute for Environment, Conservation, and Sustainability, and of course the partners that they have at Another Story Bookshop, Harbinger Media, and the National Observer. So I'm going to take a little bit of a detour from the presentations before I give thanks to Angele and Matt and Geoff. I'm going to talk more personally about my journey to this very moment where I'm sitting and talking in front of you, standing and talking in front of you. So I could talk a lot. So I'm going to keep it. There's like 3 points I want to focus on, and sort of like the kind of like past, present, and past, present, and more present, I guess you could say. So the first one is a little bit of history. I mentioned that we lived in Calgary, and while we were in Calgary, it was very white. Not just the snow, but people. And this is in 19-something. And so, and so when we were there, of course, my mother found the Jamaican Canadian Association. So there's other Black people at the JCA. We felt like, all right, we got some people we can work with. So at that JCA, they used to have something called a Saturday school program, but my sisters and my brother and myself, we called it Black School. And the reason why we called it Black School is because when you went there, this all Black children, everybody's Black, and we're like, wow, this is amazing, you know? The reason why I called it Black School, though, is because the people who were teaching us were a vice principal and a principal. Now, these 2 women, they were Black-skinned women, cool complexion, like absolutely gorgeous, and they used to wear red lipstick. It was a thing. So when I saw them, you know, I was like, wow, we could do that. Why, you know, I'm at school and I'm thinking, my principal's not Black. I don't see anybody Black in administration. But then I come to Black School and I see it's possible. So we go on from there, Black School. All right, we forward a little bit. I'm a daughter, you know, I'm a sibling, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm also a mother, and I'm a community representative. And then there's a whole bunch of other things behind that. You know, sometimes I'll get to that part. And what brought me to the role, I'm going to speak more about my role as a community representative or a tenant rep. That role, in about, I think it was 2013, we ended up, due to some soil erosion that took place where I live. I live on close to the Humber River. But we live on the top of a hill, so there's a very steep embankment. And one of our young people, he was about 9 years old at the time, he actually, due to the soil erosion, there was a large enough space for him to actually slip underneath the fence and slide halfway down the escarpment. He didn't die. But they had to helicopter rescue him. It was extremely dangerous, and so on. When they wanted to address the soil erosion, I think the Conservation Authority, they wanted to hold a meeting at like Tuesday at 3:30 in the afternoon in Vaughan. Now, I live in Toronto, and this is in like 2013. So where are we going? There's no transit going to Vaughan at that time. So I called them, and I said, you have to hold that meeting because we want to talk about what happened over here. The boy fell over here. So you're gonna have to come here and have a meeting with us so that we can talk to you about what we want. So thankfully, they were really, really receptive. And they said, okay, we'll cancel the meeting and we're gonna come to Scarlett. When they did, we had about 45 people show up. And after that happened, we ended up, of course, they had to retrofit the park. They did all kinds of stuff. So they ended up, all the residents, we had an election after that, and of course all the residents were like, look here, we want her. We don't need the election, we just want her. So we go on. Then we had a series of devastating floods. So in 2017, we had 8 floods within the span of 7 months, and I live in a tower community, so like a high rise. And so we had 8 floods in 7 months. 4 of them were sewage floods, and 2 of them devastated families on the first floor so much that they actually had to go to a hotel. And you know, when we talk about climate and climate change and who it affects and so on, we always talk about the people who pay the most are ones contributing the least. Well, it just so happened in the building that actually was the case. We had one family who was living with quite a few disabilities, and they were the family that actually paid the most for the devastation that was caused. So as a result, we turned our lobby into a classroom and we created these environmental workshops. We call them eco-blitzes. And those eco-blitzes are what actually changed the game, which leads me to my second piece. So Women for Climate. So in 2022, there's a program called Women for Climate that the city runs. And I was told to apply. It's a mentorship program. I said, okay, sure. I applied to the program, and then I found out that you could win an award, like you can win money, for this if you win this a pitch competition. So the workshops that we did were so game changing. I mean, the first time we did the workshop, we had about 55% of the building participate. That is unheard of. Now, I was cheesed because I know everybody. So I'm like, 55% is not good enough, folks, okay? So we held it the second time, and the second time we held it, we had 88% of the building participate. That's what I'm talking about, you know what I'm saying? So as a result of that and the workshops and the game-changing workshops that we did, based on cultural relevance. Who is in the room? Who am I talking to? That is who I want to create curriculum around, and that's how I want to talk to you about climate action or what have you. It all depends on who's in the room, and that's who I get to bring forward. So those workshops, I go through the pitch competition. Man, it was hard. You ever done a pitch competition? It's hard, man. So I did the pitch competition. It was crazy, but then I won. Right? Yes, I won. Yeah, then after that was mayhem. Because, pardon me, now that I won, everybody's calling me. Now you remember the roles I gave you. I'm a mother, I'm a sibling, pardon me, I'm all these things. So on top of that, pardon me, on top of that now, I am trying to manage media. What? Everybody's calling me to interview, all that kind of stuff. I'm like, listen, I don't have the capacity for this. Anyhow, we move on, and so we get SEED up and running. SEED stands for Circular Environmental Education and Design. We get SEED up and running in 2024. We applied for charitable status, which we now have, and so when we do that, I'm still this strong army of one doing this work. So we go along, and it's a lot to take on. Even as I stand here before you, the amazing, outstanding work, as I mentioned in the intro, we were internationally recognized for the workshops. Listen, I gone international, man. You mean I can't get $1 to hire somebody to do admin? Seriously? Anyways, so the reason why I say that is because it brings me to the funding. And so my journey has taken me to these amazing places and spaces with all of you. I'm still doing this, though, on a little bit of a dime, right? And so I just want to read some stats, and then I'll close, right? So if you're a nonprofit or a charity, and because we want to measure impact, we're not trying to turn profits here. We're actually trying to change people's lives, right? So when I look at some of the stats, we have that less than 1% of all philanthropic funding in Canada was allocated to Black-led charities and organizations, and this is in 2018, I believe. For every $100 donated to a Canadian charity, only about 7 cents went to Black charities. I am one, the 7 cents, maybe I got 0.1 cent. And then the last thing is, between 2017 and 2018, grants to Black-led organizations represented only 0.07% of total grants made by major foundations. So I even know someone right now who applied for funding. They're a very tiny organization, got the funding, paid themselves along with the other folks to do the work, but now they're actually in a bit of hot water because they paid themselves. It's apparently not allowed, even though they did the work. So I want to close by saying that, the work I do is incredibly fun. It's what brings me here in front of all of you and everyone on this panel, and I thoroughly enjoy it. But it costs, and so I need help, and the help needs to come ASAP. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of the panelists. Maybe one more round of applause just for all these excellent talks. Thank you. It says that my mic is on. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for introducing all of your work. I think there are so many kind of fascinating and important resonances and things to draw out. Some that I thought of, some just by hearing them, and some that I kind of prepared to ask. And I'm going to start with you, Angele, just because you went first. And in your talk, you were describing the kinds of the ways that the Indigenous climate leaders, the criticisms that they had of the kind of green economy, and the way that that was both kind of on display at COP, but I'm sure more generally as well. So I want to just kind of invite you to maybe tell us a bit more about what those kind of critiques of a green economy are from the Indigenous climate leaders, like including yourself, obviously, what some of those criticisms are, and maybe also if any of those criticisms, if you can see that the ways that they might connect with or resonate with. Obviously, Matt and Geoff were both talking about some of the critiques or ways that the green economy is also failing working people, and what are the kind of shared criticisms? What are some of the differences, and how might those things be brought together?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. Actually, after listening to your presentations, I just want to clarify who Indigenous climate leaders are. So these aren't like I don't know how to say this. These aren't rich, powerful people that are going to the UN. A lot of them are grannies and youth. They're Indigenous knowledge keepers that are elders and the youth that they're training. Some of them are Indigenous, like lawyers and professors like myself. Some of them work in climate policy. Some of them work for like the Assembly of First Nations, the Métis National Council, the Inuit Circumpolar Institute. So we have like this Indigenous intelligentsia, but we also have like all of these people that are also highly educated. Some of them are also highly educated in our traditional ways and being and knowing. So myself, like I am a language speaker. I speak my language, but I also come from a community in northern Alberta in the oil sands region where we're fighting to maintain our treaty rights to hunt and harvest on the land. My grandfather was a hunter and a trapper, and he trapped until he hunted until he was 82 years old. That's how long my grandfather lived and lived off the land. My family has traditional raspberry and berry bushes around our home. But now that's being destroyed by climate change. We're surrounded by forest fires. And so these are the type of people doing that work. And so Indigenous climate leaders tend to be people who have strong relationships to the land, strong relationship to the water, but are also educated. And it includes elders and youth. And so when Indigenous people come together and talk about things like green economy, we're noticing globally that, so what's happened in my backyard in the oil sands region of Alberta is that our water system and our ecosystems around us are being destroyed because of the production of bitumen, right? Fracking, it's not good for your water, it's not good for your forests, it's not good for our moose and all of the things that we rely on in our traditional ways. It's also not a good economy for us because we tend to get the most precarious work. Anyways, so what we're noticing in our backyard in the oil sands region, it's also happening in Bolivia, where they're mining lithium and all of these critical minerals. So the Indigenous people in those places are seeing that their right to free, prior, informed consent is being violated. They're not being consulted. They're not being given the best jobs. Their water and lands are being destroyed. On top of that, there's like this idea of carbon sinks, of conservation. And so what's happening is oil companies or corporations are buying parts of our forests and our biodiverse areas as carbon sinks on the market, but then that prevents us from going on our traditional territories to practice like our traditional ways of knowing and being. And we're also the ones that are maintaining the biodiversity of the planet. So we're not able to do that when, you know, our land base is being sold off in this way on the carbon market. And, you know, I've heard examples of, for example, the example I like to give is an example I heard from the Sami people in Norway, where they were building a bunch of wind turbines, which at the time seemed like a great idea, right? Let's go green. But where the best wind is also the best area for reindeer herding, where they take their reindeer in the winter to eat grass. And so their whole traditional way of being is connected to the reindeer and the land and the forest. And where they're building these wind turbines is terrible for their traditional way. And our traditional ways of knowing and being are also connected to our languages, to our economies, to our family systems. So if you destroy a relationship to the land, you destroy all of those things. I also heard the same thing about wind turbines being built in like sub-Saharan Africa. Those are the best places for herding as well. So, you know, Indigenous people need to be consulted when there's a green energy project. But I also, in our book, we interviewed Indigenous folks in Alberta who have been very active in building solar panel projects on First Nations. So when Indigenous people do have the self-determination and do build these green energy projects, they do so in a way that's holistic, in a good relationship with the land and the people. And the one woman we interviewed from Montana First Nation basically built solar panels for her First Nation so that the community does not have to pay energy costs for their administration buildings, and they also don't have to pay energy costs for like their elders' housing. And in addition to that, the excess energy that they produce from the solar panels, they sell it back to the energy market. So it's beneficial to the community on various levels. So, and also another thing I heard from Indigenous Clean Energy, which is an organization here in Canada, is that there's more green energy projects in Indigenous communities than in small rural municipalities. So we're doing it, and we're doing it properly, but we need to be consulted. Yeah, so I hope that answered your question.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. All right, maybe I'll ask Matt a question next. One of the things that it's interesting in Angele, in your presentation, you started with this idea that in Canada, and I think maybe you were even speaking more broadly, but you mentioned the fact that often in conversations about green transition, it's energy workers and workers in the extractive sectors who are really the emphasis of a lot of those policies and a lot of the kind of jobs creation programs, and who are at the center kind of this green transition kind of discourse that is really aiming to create a different kind of green economy. But that this might also fail to kind of take into consideration all of the people who are precariously employed in care work and in other forms of work. So Matt, I was wondering if you might be able to kind of pick up on this idea that the focus on industrial workers might obscure also the ways that there are so many kind of secondary service industries and care workers who are, you know, also such a massive, if not majority of the working class that need to also be central to a kind of materialist climate politics that you're talking about. And just, yeah, how you would respond to that kind of provocation, maybe, to the kind of majoritarian climate politics that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think the majoritarian part is the part that realizes that climate change really affects every part of our lives as people that, as we've been hearing, people that are working through the land the most, right? They're seeing their lives destroyed by climate change. But what capitalism does, and unfortunately, is it's for centuries now been systematically dispossessing people from the land and turning them into proletarians who have to survive via the market, right? Who need to sell their labor and skills on a market to gain money to survive. And so I think our climate politics has to be able to speak to that majority of workers all across the planet who are struggling to survive via the market. And again, I think whether it's care workers or service sector workers, people need housing. People need cheaper, or I would argue for free, electricity, right? And a lot of people around the planet don't have electricity at all, right? So transport, another one, you know, it's small, but a mayor in Boston got elected on a Green New Deal platform and offers free public transit now to poor communities. And so these types of things that are related to climate, transport, housing, energy, if we can figure out how to decarbonize those sectors and offer cheaper access to precarious workers, that will affect the whole working class. It won't. Now, the reason I think there's, you know, with industrial workers, number one, you know, there's a lot of talk of just transition, but there's no, if you go to a community where a coal mine has been shut down or a coal power plant has been shut down, there's no just transition. There's mass unemployment, and we've been living through a period of mass deindustrialization. So the industrial working class has been basically eviscerated through globalization and all these trade agreements, and so they are angry, and they you know, so they are looking for answers for why their lives are being destroyed by global capitalism. And so I think we have an opportunity to win over those workers with a vision that, you know, actually solving climate change actually takes, like I said before, it takes a lot of industrial labor. We have to rebuild transit systems, electric systems. We have to rebuild, and not just industrial workers, but like agricultural workers. We have to rebuild, refashion how we grow food. All this stuff is going to take a lot of workers, a lot of work. And so we have to have a vision of how those workers will be agents of this transformation, because for all the talk of the green economy and this and that, the problem is there is no green economy. We're still in a very brown economy, a very dirty economy. We're not actually transitioning away from fossil fuels. The globe still basically depends on 80% of energy from fossil fuels. So I think we need to realize that to turn that fossil fuel powered economy into a green economy, it's those workers in those systems are going to have to be at the core of that solution. And right now they're hostile to climate action for the most part, and that's not good for us. You know, I've been telling this anecdote. I was in Denmark, where I was meeting with a lot of climate justice activists who were all, you know, had a lot of the activist lingo down. But during that visit, the Danish had an election where the returns showed that a lot of the wind workers, the people that work in the wind industry, were voting for the right. So if we cannot win over the wind workers, right, we're not, you know, like, what are we doing? So like these, so I think we need like a two-pronged strategy, a strategy that appeals to the whole working class, and also I would add the people that are still on the land who are most vulnerable to climate change, to appeal to that big, broad swath of society. But also we need a strategy that can win over the workers that are going to rebuild the world and have the power to kind of force the transition that's not happening.
think both Matt and Angele, your talks really spoke to why the green economy that may not exist, is facing backlash from all kinds of different parts of the population. And Geoff, your presentation also in a way spoke to now how this green economy that doesn't even exist is becoming the scapegoat for something even worse. So I was wondering maybe if you could just say more about what you have been learning from these far-right conferences and conversations that you've been privy to, and what you think maybe the lessons are. I think you ended from a place that was, in a sense, like showing how powerful these messages have been and how they've been able to, the far right has been able to bring together these unlikely alliances. But I know that you also obviously write for climate journalism. And so I wonder what you think the kind of strategic lessons might be, and what you think in a more kind of positive sense, what you're learning and what you would take home to the kind of climate communicators or people just kind of worried about the world, what you would say.
What would I say? Well, I think I'm kind of in alignment with all the speakers here in saying that it doesn't really work to just isolate climate change as this scientific or technical or technological problem. And for years and years, when people have tried to broaden what climate change is about or how we should fix it, including by bringing in marginalized communities or the working class, there's often a powerful backlash against that within the climate community, and people say don't do a progressive wish list, just stick to the climate. But it's clear that that's a pretty losing strategy, and you can see that in places like this art conference where I was at, where they were just making totally deranged connections between all sorts of issues that weren't even really connected at all. But the reason that the far right is doing this is because at the heart of its strategy is an attempt to create solidarity between a whole bunch of different movements and groups. They're trying to weld together religious right conservatives, economic libertarians, populists, like Silicon Valley tech bros. And these are a lot of organizations or a lot of groups and movements that don't necessarily share a lot, but if you can bring them all together, that's how you really achieve political power. And so just to give you an example of what that kind of looks like on the ground in concrete terms in a much more positive, hopeful direction on climate change. I used to live in Brooklyn, and there was this really incredible climate justice organization called Uprose. It's based in Sunset Park, which is mostly a Latino Chinese neighborhood in South Brooklyn. And I interviewed the head of the group, this person, Elizabeth Yeen-Pierre, a few years ago, because she had been involved in this really amazing and fascinating campaign, which started out as an anti-gentrification project. So there was this major developer in New York City that was trying to build a massive food hall and luxury hotels and sort of a tech hub like you see in cities all over the world. And the community didn't want that because it's predominantly a working class community and rents have been affordable for many years. And so a bunch of people in Sunset Park got together and they said, how can we oppose this thing? And they had a lot of debate about what the best message would be. And so a bunch of people wanted to make it about displacement and gentrification, which is obviously very central to what the struggle was. But Elizabeth and a few of the other climate justice voices in the neighborhood said if it was only about higher rents and displacement, the neighborhood could easily be painted by their opponents as being anti-working class and anti-job, when in reality, they wanted more jobs and more opportunities for people. And so the community decided to make the message against this gentrification project. They made the message about protecting the climate jobs of the future. And what they argued was that if this developer came around and turned a lot of the port in South Brooklyn into basically like gentrified industry, this would take away valuable industrial and manufacturing space, which could instead be used to create green technologies and employ people in the neighborhood. And so Uprose was actually successful, and they blocked this like $900 million project. And now there's a factory going in on the waterfront in Brooklyn where they're going to manufacture huge blades for offshore wind turbines. And so to me, that's just like a really fascinating example of how to build solidarity between different movements and groups and actually be like really effective.
Thanks so much. I have a question as well for you, Zamani, and now listening to you kind of introduce your work with SEED, one thing I was really struck by was that you got 88% of the people in the building to come to your workshops. That's really amazing. So I had another question kind of prepared to ask you, but I think I want to pick up on this idea of like building solidarity, which I think Geoff was kind of talking about in a very sinister way of how the right seems to be so good at building solidarity. And I wonder if you could just speak to your experience of kind of working with people in their capacity as tenants, and I guess what the kind of, how you've, what I guess the successes have been in terms of organizing tenants around environment and climate stewardship, maybe what some of the barriers are that you've encountered in that kind of organizing, and just generally what you would say about how you, that kind of success rate, 88% of people, that's pretty amazing.
Well, thank you very much for that question. Yeah, and I love that question because, okay, so one of the, you remember I was talking about Black School, okay? So we used to actually have to recite a poem every Saturday when we went to the poem. I won't say the entire poem because I can actually remember the whole thing. My sister and I can probably recite it. But the last line of that poem said, the poem is called Who Am I? And it's written by Benjamin E. Mays, who was an advisor to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And so at the end of the poem, there's a line that says, whatever I touch, my aim should always be to leave that which I touch better than I found it. And so I walk with that principle every day, all the time. So when I got to the soil erosion thing where the boy fell over and so on, and the resident said, we want her. I live in a community where I have a heavy East African population in the building. So, and a heavy Muslim population in the building as well. So when I was running for the tenant rep position and whatnot, I said to there was another person I was running with, and she is Muslim. So I said, oh, she's got it, like, I'm good. And if she gets it, hey, I'm gonna support her and do all that. So when the results came in, it was like landslide victory that I win. And I was floored because I'm like, what? Okay, so and in that moment, I actually took it very seriously. So I said, okay, this is how we're gonna do. So initially, what I realized is that people trust me. So when we had that soil erosion, the fact that I called, did something about it, just did something. The fact that I did something about it, and it actually changed the way people got to participate in what they wanted to see when everything was said and done. That, I took that very, very seriously, that trust. And so one of the principles that is attached, you know, if you download it from my website, one of the principles done by this group called Black Space. It's a Black Space Manifesto. This is a group of urban planners and activists, artists, and so on. They're all Black. And one of the principles that they live by is moving at the speed of trust. And the reason I say that is because if I don't trust you to lead me or to lead, you know, as a tenant rep, or sorry, as a tenant, so that means the trust in the super, trust in the people who, run the space. If I don't trust you, then it's going to be less likely that I'm going to do something for you. And so when we had the Blitz now, the other part is I know everybody. So the other principle or the other things that I took from my ancestors, from my grandparents, from my mom, my aunties, is that I cannot walk by anybody and not say good morning, good afternoon, how you doing, acknowledging the humanity in the people I'm working for, or I'm serving, right, in my role as tenant rep. So because I knew everyone, the first time we did it, I said, no, how come you didn't participate? And we made it fun, So the second time we did it, I think there was some kind of flag, everybody gets patriotic around, Olympics and what do you call the Pan Am Games and all that kind of stuff, World Cup, things like that. Everybody gets really patriotic. So I drew on that diversity because we have a lot of diverse people in our community. I drew from that and I looked at basically climate change headlines in the countries where the people who live in my community come from. And when I did that, I started to talk to them in that language. So if you're from Pakistan, Sri Lanka, India, I'm looking at what's happening in your country and I'm talking to you about that. Because now it's relevant. Now it means something to you. And so after I did that, I think that's the reason why we ended up getting 88% of the building. One, because I'm looking at you, I'm like, where are you? And the second thing is because I want to make sure that this affects all of us, regardless of the fact that you live here. Everything you do affects somebody somewhere else. And chances are it affects your family that live in those other places, So I think that the trust and the humanity, acknowledging the humanity in the people that I'm serving, that went a big way, far way, and making the workshops culturally relevant for the audience and whoever is participating in the workshops, which is something that I think that's actually the secret sauce that we won the award for. So, yeah.
Amazing, thank you. One more just round of applause for our speakers. I've learned a lot. And now I want to open things up to the audience. Are there any questions in the audience? Okay, I'm gonna get some mics. Here you go.
Thank you for all the panelists, and I just want to echo a lot of things that Matt and all the panelists and Zamani said as well. My name's Helena. I run a nonprofit called Climate Resilient Communities, and we basically provide data services, learning services to support climate actions and community advocacy. And something that I realized while doing this work with youth, with the community, is that nobody's gonna do this for us, aside from the communities ourselves, right? And my struggle is the same as Zamani's, right? We take a community-centric approach, right? We focus on the grassroots level, but a lot of the problem that we see from people in the position of power with capital is that even the ones on the left side, let's say, they believe that regular people are not interested in long-term and slow change, and that the traditional way through education is not the way to make a difference or make an impact. So that's kind of like whenever we go to a funder, whenever we go to someone with capital, that's what I kept hearing. And we know that that's not true because we can see the changes we made in our audiences, the communities that we serve through those workshops. So my question to the panelists is that how do we organize in a way that, aside from crowdsourcing, aside from grassroots, is there any other way that we can get support? Like basically, almost like a class war. There must be class trader at some point, right? At somewhere that is willing to support what we're working on. So I'm just wondering, because a lot of you have coming from academic background, coming from much broader circles, and I'm just wondering, is there a way around this, basically? Yeah.
I can offer a thought. I think that in order for, it's people that make up policies, it's people that make up governments, it's people that make up, that are part of think tanks and all these things. It's people that do that, right? So I think there needs to be, we can use our influence some more, to encourage folks to actually fund differently. So right now, I know that when it comes to organizations, the model is pretty much, give piecemeal funding, it comes with all the restrictions and all the things you can and cannot do, who you can and cannot pay, all that stuff. But there's no, you can't do benefits, there's nothing, you can't do much with the funding. So I think for me, one of the things I'm hoping to help influence is changing the way people fund the work that we do. By listening, by offering our thoughts. So when funders come and they talk to me, especially about, or when you apply for funding and you meet the funder. So when I meet the funder, I ask them questions. I more interview them than they are interviewing me. Because I'll give you a really quick example. Last year, I applied for a whole bunch of grants and so on. Some of them I'm still waiting on. I have decided now that I will not apply for any grants that do not have operational funding, period. It's just not happening because I don't work for free. And neither do they, right? So I think, just doing what we can to push back and influence how the funding models are presented to us, I think that would be one thing that could be helpful. I don't know.
Quickly, the premise I have on this topic is that they have a lot of money, but we have a lot of people, but we're disorganized as a people, right? And so I think it's definitely possible to find the class traders in that are willing to fund really innovative and inspiring organizations. But for the class war, the sort of the standard model of organization is that because we have more people, if we have member-based organizations where members pay dues and and then build like from the bottom up a democratic organization on the basis of that, that can build kind of power to confront the capitalist class trader or not, right? So the traditional method of that, we see in society are unions and parties, right? Both of which have membership, dues, and this builds resources, money, power from the actual membership, right? So it's a different model. It's a model that's also disorganized right now, and those models can also be very top down and very corrupt and bureaucratic. So it's not a surefire thing, but I think that kind of trying to organize the people on a mass basis, membership organizations is the way forward.
Sorry, can you name your organization again? Because you kind of mumbled it, and I think you should say it out loud.
It's a climate resilient community, so CRC, and our website is crc.place.
Amazing, thank you. I think that's a really important question that this whole panel is about in many ways, like how to build the kind of political power that we need. So thank you for that. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much. This is also a question about how to build the political power we need. And I want to bring in the politics of gender, which feels like it's kind of a bit of an elephant in the room in all of this. So right now we're seeing the politics of gender being used to undermine class solidarity. So I guess that's a question for Matt and Geoff, how they see the politics of gender working. But I'm also interested to hear from Zamani and Angel about different kinds of gender politics that you see in the movements and work that you do that could chart a different path forward, if that makes any sense. They're all big questions, but right now I'm really terrified by the way the politics of gender is being weaponized by the right in really destructive ways. Thank you.
I guess because I work with Indigenous organizations and Indigenous communities, and I'm a gender studies professor, the thing that I really rely on or I talk a lot about is that in my language, there's no concept of gender. There's no male or female. We have animate things with spirit and inanimate things, things without spirit. And so that's how we view the world. And in a lot of our traditional communities, our political leaders and economic leaders were women. And now you're seeing more of that. Like right now, our national chief at the AFN is a woman. The national president of the Métis National Council is a woman. And Indigenous climate leaders understand that in a lot of our traditional cultures, land defenders and water protectors were women. Like in my community, it was the women who would go gather the water, who were responsible for bringing water. And so now, because we had that responsibility, that powerful role of taking care of water, now there's Indigenous organizations being led by women that are protecting our water systems. So I think that's kind of different because that's our view of the world. Is that women are leaders and men are helpers and supporters of these leaders. So yeah, I don't know what to say about the right. All I have to say is the scary thing for me as a gender studies professor and someone that sometimes teaches about reproductive health and things like that is the scary thing for me is that a lot of brown women, a lot of black women, a lot of Latino women, racialized women are going to die. And so I think we need to think of these things as a human right. It's a human right to have access to health care. One of the scariest things that I've kind of thought of in my mind is that because I teach gender studies, I've attracted students from Iran and Afghanistan. And I've learned from reading their scholarship, their graduate students, about how the Taliban took over and how women slowly lost rights. I have students who were journalists, who were doctors in Afghanistan, and they lost their employment, they lost their access to education. And the stories that I hear from Afghanistan, it sounds like what's happening in America. It blows my mind. I've talked to these students privately about their own experiences, but also I've read their research about their access to healthcare, and it's super scary. And we know based on statistics and everything, it's going to be women of color that are going to die first. But you know what? White women are starting to die too because of this. And I don't know if that's going to get people's attention, but healthcare is a human right. So that's how I would approach these things, from a human rights perspective.
Maybe I would just say I think a lot of the really kind of reactionary gender politics that a lot of the far right is exploiting right now come from people's economic precarity. And so if you can address some of the economic precarity that a lot of people are facing, it takes away a lot of the energy and potency of some of those really reactionary politics. And just to give an example, so a lot of the people who work in Fort McMurray in the oil sands, for example, are males, but not predominantly, but males who have to spend 2 weeks up there in really hard working conditions, 12 hours a day, and then you're at the whim of a company that could just lay you off. You're away from your family, and so if you're sort of this isolated, overworked, kind of precarious person, the appeal of this really rigid, traditional gender role might be a bit more appealing because it gives a sense of, predictability and like stability in the world. And I've spoken with oil workers in Alberta who have transitioned a bit of their work into renewable energy, and they can use their skills some of the time to work in the oil industry and other times to build renewable energy technologies. And they found actually that once they had this stability, they relied less on having to go up north for long periods of time, and this let them be closer to their families, spend more time. And so I think in a broader sense, if there's less of that precarity in society, then there's less ability for conservative politicians to come along and exploit it.
If it's okay with you, Zamani and Matt, maybe we might move to the next question just to make sure that we have time. But thank you for that. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hey guys, fantastic panel so far. A little bit of background on myself. I'm actually an energy researcher, founder as well, in the Web3 space, so very deep in what we call regenerative finance. And what we're building now, it's actually quite interesting. It may be able to solve some of these funding misalignments that you guys have been speaking about. And I got two particular questions. They're both very related, and one of them came from the ICE, the Gathering conference, actually. So the first question I have is, AI, quantum, and all these emerging technologies, I'm curious how they will exacerbate or help the problem. And the second question, which is from the Gathering, one participant really brought up an interesting notion of chaos theory, of how everything in society pre-colonial times was very set in stone, and Indigenous tribe members had their roles, their places in society. And then colonial organizations or people came, and everything was plunged into chaos. And so my second question is, what is the past or the path forward? Is it through the past?
Well, I can speak to the AI question. I think it's definitely like really bad for the climate. And but not only because I'm kind of offended by the aesthetics of it. I think the natural gas industry is seeing AI as one of the major drivers of domestic and energy demand growth right now in North America. And that's why Alberta really wants to build all of these data centers so they can attract like the Amazons and whoever else to come up, and then they can use all the natural gas that they're fracking in Alberta to power the centers. So I think in that sense, I mean, obviously AI means many different things, but in that sense, it's like materially bad for climate change.
You had mentioned, what's your name, sorry?
Mujtaba.
What?
Mujtaba. You can call me Tabs or MK.
Okay, MK. No, it'll take me time to practice your name, and I would use it, actually. But I wanted to talk about the path forward, or is it if it's through the past? So, yes, for me, we have a principle, an African-centered principle called Sankofa, which means that you look at the past in order to make sense of the present, and then decide how you want to move forward. So and then there's also, everybody should know Bob Marley. And he's very famous for saying a statement, everything is everything, and nothing is new. So I see things through those kinds of lenses as well. We have tools, we have information, we've got Indigenous knowledge, and we've got ways of being that we can learn from, because we definitely don't know everything. So we can definitely draw on and then make sense of it in this time, at this particular moment in our advancement, liberty journey, what have you, in order to figure out how we want to move forward. So I think it is partially through the past, yeah.
Thank you so much. So we have 2 questions left, and I think just in this, keeping in mind the time, maybe we'll have both the final questions askers first from the back and then from Jordan in the center there. And then maybe we'll go to each panelist to just kind of give a response in whatever way you see fit. Yeah, so first, just in the back there, please.
Thank you. First, I'd like to commend the IECS for convening such a great panel. You really address such a breadth of the various issues that are embedded in climate communication and denialism, so thank you. The particular bone that this dog has been constantly worrying is related to this mishmash of issues that have just been glommed by the right. And so the environment and climate it's kind of lost its meaning. And I guess the question that's always on my mind is, what is the ununified, disunified, disorganized left's counter playbook to the excellent, effective, look at the results worldwide people playbook that the right has been playing by? Like, where is this playbook?
That's a great question. Okay, so first question is where and what is the playbook? Which is a big one. And we have 3 minutes, and now Jordan, you can ask another question too.
Mine's actually quite boring and
Perfect.
and little. It's a Marxist theory question, and it's for Matt. So in your book and in the talk, you talk about the PMC, the professional managerial class, but you also said you're subscribing to an old school Marxist class politics. And so I'm wondering, as someone who's maybe not so on board with this formulation, what's gained and lost by treating this group as a class, using that as a term that seems to kind of be, as far as we're concerned, and as you started your talk with, speaking about most of us in the audience as our only access to capital is through our labor power. These are class traders, maybe, rather than a class in themselves. But so also just a bit more on what is gained by that formulation as a class and maybe what's lost. Or if you just want to fully defend it, that's totally cool.
Should I start then? First to the back. One thing I've been saying is that actually, if there's anyone that harnesses class politics in the climate fight, it's the right? They're always making climate about jobs and about climate change. Climate action is meant to kind of raise energy cost and make life worse for people, right? And so, you know, in Germany right now, they've been able to harness a lot of anger about, you know, one of the critiques I make of the PMC is this sort of very technocratic approach to climate policy. We're gonna, you know, do carbon pricing, or we're gonna, in Germany, they tried to sort of, they wanted to force people to put heat pumps in their homes at a cost to working class households. You know, they would get a little tax credit, but it wouldn't cover the whole cost. It would cost thousands of euros. So this kind of technocratic carbon pricing, putting the cost on working people, the right says this is what the liberal climate conspiracy is trying to do. It's trying to make your life more costly. So we gotta counter that directly by having climate plans that actually try to make life better for people, and not try to sort of buy into this idea that climate change is a cost that everyone has to kind of internalize. That's what The Economist will tell us. But and we have to make it a class politics, where really to solve climate we need to tax the rich a lot, redistribute wealth from them to fund all the public infrastructure that's going to require to solve climate crisis. And actually that politics is very popular, like taxing the rich, funding public goods for people. That's very popular. What's not popular is carbon taxes, carbon pricing, right? Okay, so the PMC question. If you read the book carefully, which I'm sure you did, Jordan, I do admit in one point that it's really probably not technically correct to consider this a class from a Marxist perspective, because professionals do rely on their labor to survive, and most professionals that I know, if we lost our jobs within a few months, we'd be bankrupt and starving on the streets like all working class people. So ultimately, a working class movement is going to include these professional class folks. The point I'm trying to make in the book is that educated professionals are a minority of that working class, and they're and if we really want to win over the vast majority of the working class, we have to learn to speak beyond these sort of highly educated groups of people and sometimes very insular bubbles, particularly in activist spaces of people coming from that kind of highly educated certain way of speaking, things like this, that often alienate working class people. And back to the question at the back, if we're looking at the political world, I mean, basically what is happening actually is educational polarization politically. So the parties around, not just in the US and Canada, but all throughout Europe and other parts of the world, the parties that used to represent the vast working class are now shifting their base to highly educated, professional, affluent voters, right? And the more sort of traditional working class, and particularly industrial working class, those are the ones shifting to the right. So that, if you like, that is a wedge based on education that's really dividing the working class against itself right now, and it's a huge issue we have to grapple with politically. Even if you don't care about climate, which I know everyone does, we have to deal with the fact that our politics are being sort of quarantined in these insular bubbles of highly educated people, and we need to get out of that. So,
but can we also talk about this moment right now where, like, in America, Doge is destroying like their social security system and what little they have in a healthcare system? And also right now what's happening with Pierre Poilievre and Trudeau, like, what I'm seeing from my friends and family that are from Alberta, that work in the oil industry, a lot of them are Indigenous, and also from some of my friends that work in the labor movement who are a little bit conservative, is that they're like, oh crap, like the conservatives are screwing us over. Oh my God, the billionaires are gonna screw us over. We're gonna lose our healthcare. Like, people that I thought were like super conservative, they're like, oh shit, we're not, like, I can't pay for my diabetes medication. I don't have a national park to go to anymore. Oh my God, like, a lot of Indigenous men are kind of conservative because of our, Catholic assimilation. And those guys are now like, oh no, we're not gonna be able to hunt and fish? Like, Pierre Poilievre is a racist, and, oh my God, he supports Trump, and that goes against Indigenous sovereignty. So, like, even people who I thought were, like, really conservative, like the guys with the big trucks in Alberta, they're like, oh no, we actually have healthcare in Canada. We want to protect that. We can actually go hunting in our big trucks. Like, what's happening right now? So, like the Dow Jones is dropping, and a lot of oil industry people, working class oil people, they watch the price of oil. Like, that's their whole livelihood, right? So, like, is something being revealed right now that with this billionaire class that we didn't think was going to be revealed so quickly? Because people are speaking out, like conservative people that I thought were conservative, and all my family from Alberta, they're all Christian. Like, they're all like, Angele, why do you teach gender studies? Like, with all those queers, like, what are you doing? But even my Christian family members, they're like, the Bible talks about love thy neighbor. The Bible talks about take in people who are displaced. And so I'm having discussions with my Christian family members. I'm like, yeah, everything Trump's doing, everything these conservatives doing, It's not in the Bible. Like, that goes against the 10 Commandments, guys. So it's a really interesting moment right now, especially like when you talk to your conservative family members. They're like, oh, I didn't think Polyev was like that. Like, so I don't know. So it's a very interesting moment right now. Just these past, like, I don't know, 2 days. People are like, oh my God, what's happening? Is Elon Musk actually bad? They're like, I thought he was our hero. That's, you know, what these discussions that are happening. Sorry, I didn't mean to get in the middle of your discussion.
No, it's good to hear the only good news story is the potential backlash from all the yeah.
Oh, yeah, I would just say the good version of the playbook is just to build as much solidarity as possible between different movements and groups, so that way when the people that suck come to take climate policy away, there's a lot of really like revved up people ready to defend it. You don't see people marching in the streets right now about Canada's carbon tax, and that's because it's a very shallow constituency that really supports that policy. And I would also say, I mean, the right wing is doing their own version of intersectionality, but they have to stitch together a lot of different crazy factions that actually kind of hate each other behind the scenes. And you can like kind of narrow in on those really poorly like stitched up movements and just exploit the divisions, and they'll all just like tear each other apart. So that's
You have the final word.
I would say in terms of a playbook, so I think I'll offer it in this way. So I did a workshop with young people. And when I say young people, they were between the ages of 12 and 18, I believe, 12 and 18. And so they had to fill out a survey before they came to the workshop. And I asked a question to think about what do they want to do? You know, what is their life career choice that they want to participate in? So they put down everything: architect, entertainer, nurse, whatever. When they came to the workshop, one of the things that I see often is that, particularly in the young people from the spaces and places that I do the workshops in, they're not even thinking about climate and environment, any of these things. It's nowhere on their radar at all. And it's sometimes even when I show up, they're like, "Black people do that?" Pardon? So what I said, so I told them to come. When they got to the class, I said, or to the session, I said, we're gonna put your career choice take out your phones. You're gonna put your career choice in Google, and then you're gonna put like environmental careers in with that choice that they made, right? That decision they've made. And they started, all of a sudden, like popcorn style, you start to see them say, oh my gosh, I never even knew that was an option. That is, for me, the best. So now we have pockets of the people thinking about how they're going to influence what takes place in their lives just by changing the lens or having them look through a lens of climate and education or climate and environment and so on. They need to we just need to shift. And this is a lot of genius. There's a lot of genius out there with people in general, young people specifically. There's a lot of genius there. And I've convinced myself that I look at one every day. And so I need them to start thinking about a future with a climate lens on it so that they can start even thinking everything they do is in relation to helping us get out of the chaotic space that we're in right now. So I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. Another round of applause for our amazing panelists. Thank you so much for your excellent questions, and to the other organizers, to Tatiana, to Ria, to Imra. Thank you so much. And I'll just plug the event tomorrow one more time. It's on race, labor, and the political fractures of climate actions. You can see Matt give a longer talk alongside Miles Lennon, and that's at 3 p.m. tomorrow. So thanks again so much for coming. Good night.
Like thoroughly fun, like very, very fun. Very fun.
I wanted to thank Hannah for hosting tonight and all our guests. And I just wanted to point out a little something that Tatiana has instituted early on in the life of the IECS, and that is these little gift bags. Now, the gift bags aren't pens and pads of paper and calendars that you'll never use again. They are an interesting assortment of objects. They're sourced locally. Many of them are donated. I think you'll be very interested and excited to find what's in there. Tatiana did the work of reaching out to different companies here, and I have to say they're all made in Canada as well.
Can I get him across the border?
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I don't think they're tariffable yet.
Well, it's nice to meet you all. Thank you. It was good. It was good.